The chandeliers of the grand ballroom dripped light like frozen waterfalls, their crystal facets scattering 1,000 fractured rainbows across the faces of New York's elite. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, hummed with the curated murmur of power, the low thrum of billionaires discussing markets, of politicians trading favors, of philanthropists polishing their public halos. This was the Crystal Wing Foundation Gala, the glittering apex of the city's social calendar, an arena where reputations were forged and fortunes pledged in the same breath. And at its center stood Marcus Grant. He held a champagne flute, the liquid inside untouched, its effervescence a silent, frantic energy that mirrored the tension coiled in his own gut. Dressed in a bespoke tuxedo of midnight blue so dark it was almost black, he was an island of stark minimalism in a sea of opulent excess. At 46, he had the lean, disciplined build of a man who treated his body like a machine, and a face that seemed carved from obsidian, impassive, unreadable, with eyes that held the unnerving stillness of a deep, cold lake. He was the founder and CEO of Apex Innovations, a tech behemoth that had devoured its competitors with ruthless efficiency. He was a self-made myth, the boy from the gutters of the outer boroughs who had clawed his way to the pinnacle of a world that was never meant for him. Tonight, he was to be its honoree, the recipient of the Foundation's prestigious Vanguard Award for his work in funding educational programs in underserved communities. It was a calculated move, a piece on the grand chessboard of his latest, most audacious venture, the hostile takeover of Finch Industries, one of the oldest and most powerful legacy corporations in the country. The award was a shield, a public relations masterstroke designed to soften his image as a corporate raider and present him as a benevolent visionary. A deferential silence fell as the Foundation's chairwoman took the stage. Marcus felt hundreds of eyes settle on him, a weight he had long grown accustomed to. He kept his expression neutral, a mask of polite gratitude he had perfected over 2 decades of boardroom battles. But as the chairwoman began her glowing introduction, a figure detached itself from a shadowed corner and moved toward him with the predatory grace of a shark gliding through water. Alistair Finch. He was Marcus's opposite in every conceivable way. Where Marcus was carved angles and muted tones, Alistair was soft edges and inherited luster. His tuxedo was classic black, his hair a perfect, golden sweep of old money genetics. He was the CEO of Finch Industries, a title he had inherited along with his grandfather's signet ring and a crippling sense of entitlement. He approached Marcus with a smile that never reached his pale blue eyes, a champagne flute held aloft in a gesture of convivial camaraderie that was utterly false. "Marcus," Alistair said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "a remarkable evening. Truly, the Vanguard Award. Who would have thought?" The unspoken addendum hung in the air between them. "Who would have thought a creature like you could ever attain something like this?" "Alistair," Marcus replied, his tone even, betraying nothing. "Kind of you to say." The chairwoman's voice droned on from the stage, listing Marcus's accomplishments like verses from a holy text. Neither man listened. Their attention was locked, a silent, vicious battle being waged in the space of a few feet. "I must admit, I'm impressed," Alistair continued, taking a small sip of his champagne. "The way you've maneuvered this takeover. Hostile. Of course. But then, that's always been your style, hasn't it? Taking what isn't yours." Marcus simply watched him, his silence a weapon Alistair seemed determined to disarm. Around them, a few influential board members and rival CEOs had subtly shifted their positions, forming a loose, curious circle. They could smell blood in the water. "But this award," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was loud enough for their audience to hear. It's a beautiful piece of theater. The titan of industry giving back to the little people. It almost makes one forget where you came from. He paused, letting the insinuation land. Then, as the chairwoman reached the crescendo of her speech, a man who has redefined the very meaning of innovation and philanthropy. Alistair raised his glass higher, his smile widening into something sharp and cruel. "A toast," he declared, his voice ringing out with practiced charm, capturing the attention of their immediate circle. "To Marcus Grant." He waited for Marcus to raise his glass, with a slow, deliberate motion. Marcus complied, the crystal cool against his skin. Their glasses did not touch. Alistair's eyes glittered. A man who proves that no matter how high you fly, you can never truly escape the ashes of your past. The word struck Marcus with the force of a physical blow. Ashes. The word was a key. Unlocking a dark room in his memory, he kept bolted shut. For a split second, the glittering ballroom dissolved, replaced by the smell of smoke, the searing heat of flames, the sound of splintering wood, and a girl's scream swallowed by the roar. The coded venom in Alistair's toast was lost on most, who simply heard a vaguely poetic tribute to a humble origin story. But a few key people, investors who had known the Finch family for generations, rivals who had done their due diligence on Marcus's history, exchanged knowing, uncomfortable glances. They understood. Alistair had just drawn a line in the sand, publicly and irrevocably, connecting Marcus's present success to a past tragedy they shared. Marcus's composure was a fortress. Not a muscle in his face moved. The chaotic swirl of memory and rage was contained, locked down behind a wall of sheer will. He held Alistair's gaze, and, in the frozen moment that stretched between them, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a control that was more terrifying than any outburst, he slightly inclined his head and took a slow, deliberate sip from his flute. He did not offer a toast in return. He offered nothing. His silence was an answer in itself, a chilling acknowledgement of the declaration of war. As the chairwoman finally announced his name to a storm of applause, Marcus set his untouched glass down on a passing waiter's tray. He straightened his jacket, the fabric settling perfectly over his broad shoulders, and walked toward the stage, each step measured and precise. He moved like a man walking toward a throne, but his eyes held the cold, distant fire of someone marching toward a gallows, someone else's gallows. The applause was a meaningless roar in his ears. The only sound he heard was the crackle of a long dead fire, and the echo of Alistair's promise. The past was not buried. It was about to be weaponized. The penthouse was less a home than a declaration, perched 70 floors above the glittering grid of Manhattan. It was a temple of glass, steel, and stark white marble. The minimalist furniture seemed to float in the vast, open spaces, each piece an object of severe, functional beauty. There were no photographs, no sentimental trinkets, no clutter to betray the human frailties of its owner. It was a fortress built to keep the world out, a sterile sanctuary from which Marcus Grant could observe the city he had conquered, yet never truly joined. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights a sprawling, indifferent galaxy at his feet. The reflection that stared back was a stranger in a tuxedo, a ghost occupying a life of impossible luxury. He loosened his bow tie, the silk whispering against his skin, and shrugged out of his jacket, draping it over a chair that was more sculpture than seating. The Vanguard Award, a heavy shard of sculpted crystal, sat on the marble countertop of his bar, catching the light and refracting it into cold, sharp splinters. He traced the rim of a water glass with his fingertip, A subconscious habit from a time when he was thirsty and had nothing. From a time when a simple glass of clean water was a luxury. The gesture grounded him, pulling him back from the precipice of memory where Alistair's words had pushed him. Ashes. The word echoed in the cathedral-like silence of the penthouse. He closed his eyes, and the fire came again. Not as a coherent memory, but as a series of violent, sensory snapshots. The suffocating heat, the acrid taste of smoke, the frantic, high-pitched ringing in his ears, and a face pale, framed by dark hair, eyes wide with terror. Lily, Alistair's younger sister. He felt a familiar, deep ache across his back, a phantom pain that sometimes surfaced when he was exhausted or under immense stress. He reached back, his fingers tracing the network of raised, ropey scars hidden beneath his shirt, a permanent map of that night. A testament to a truth he had long since buried. A truth Alistair had just threatened to excavate with a bulldozer. His phone buzzed on the counter, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through his reverie. The caller ID read, Elena. He answered, his voice a low rasp. It's late. The war room is never closed. Elena Vostok's voice replied, crisp and pragmatic, devoid of pleasantries. I saw the gala footage. Alistair's toast. The financial blogs are already dissecting it. Ashes of the past. They're speculating it's a reference to your early struggles. They're half right, Marcus said, turning away from the window. There was a pause on the other end. Elena was more than his chief legal counsel. She was his strategist, his confidant, the one person who could translate the world's noise into actionable data. She was fiercely intelligent, relentlessly loyal, and had a bullshit detector honed to a razor's edge. This is about more than the acquisition. Isn't it? She asked, her tone shifting from analytical to concerned. The way he looked at you. Marcus. That wasn't a rival. That was a zealot. Finch Industries isn't just a company to him, Marcus said, pouring himself a glass of water. It's his birthright, and he sees me as the barbarian at the gate. He's going to fight dirty, Elena stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Old money has its own rulebook. They'll use shame, rumor, and insinuation weapons you can't counter in a courtroom. Marcus took a long swallow of water. He already has. He told her about the toast, about the specific, venomous choice of the word ashes. He didn't explain its full meaning. He had never spoken of that night to anyone, but Elena was sharp enough to understand the implications. He's signaling to his allies, she deduced instantly, reminding them of a shared history, drawing a line between us and you. He's framing this as a culture war, not a corporate one. He's telling them, you don't belong. A story I've heard before, Marcus said, the bitterness in his voice as cold as the marble beneath his feet. Then we need to be prepared, Elena said, her voice all business again. The preliminary board meeting is in 48 hours. Your flight to Chicago is tomorrow at noon. Alistair will do everything in his power to ensure you don't make that meeting. Or, if you do, that you arrive rattled and off balance. Expect delays. Expect provocations. He will test you every step of the way. Let him, Marcus said, his voice hardening. Let him try. He ended the call and stood in the silence once more. Elena was right. The gala was just the opening salvo. Alistair's world, the world of Finch Industries, was a suffocating cathedral of old money tradition. He'd seen its headquarters during a prior, failed attempt at a friendly merger. The boardroom was paneled in dark, oppressive mahogany, the walls lined with oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors staring down with judgmental eyes. The air smelled of lemon polish and decay. It was a place where legacy was a cudgel, where tradition was used to strangle innovation. It was everything Marcus had fought to escape, and everything he now intended to dismantle. His own headquarters at Apex was the antithesis, a soaring structure of glass and light, where ideas flowed freely in open concept spaces, and the only sound was the clinical hum of servers processing the future. He had built an empire on logic, data, and relentless forward momentum. Alistair was about to wage a war with ghosts. But ghosts, Marcus knew, had a power all their own. As he finally began to undress, the reflection in the dark glass of the window showed him the scarred landscape of his back. A battlefield from a long-forgotten war. A war Alistair Finch was determined to fight all over again. The airport was a river of controlled chaos, a torrent of human anxieties and expectations flowing through channels of polished linoleum and TSA checkpoints. Marcus moved through it with his customary economy of motion, a single, sleek carry-on gliding silently behind him. He wore a simple, dark travel suit, foregoing his usual driver and private jet for a commercial. First-class flight. It was a deliberate choice, a message to his future employees at Finch Industries that he was not an out-of-touch monarch like Alistair. It was also, he knew, a vulnerability. As he approached the first-class check-in counter for Horizon Airlines, he felt a prickle of unease. The line was unusually stagnant. At the head of it, a gate agent with her blonde hair pulled into a severe, tight bun was engaged in a tense conversation with a flustered family. Marcus recognized the calculated inefficiency of a system being deliberately gummed up. This was the first move, the minor annoyance. He checked the time on his watch. He had a comfortable margin. Finally, it was his turn. He stepped forward and placed his ticket on the counter. The agent, whose name tag read Sarah, looked at it, then up at him. Her eyes, a flat, washed-out blue, held a flicker of something that wasn't mere professional indifference. It was a cold, practiced dismissiveness. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice neutral. Sarah Mitchell picked up the ticket, her fingers holding it by the very edge, as if it were contaminated. She didn't scan it. She didn't look at her computer screen. She simply held it up to the fluorescent light, her lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. The air around the counter thickened. The passengers behind Marcus began to shift impatiently. "There seems to be a problem with this ticket, sir," she said, her voice a carefully modulated blend of politeness and accusation. Oh, Marcus kept his tone mild. "And what might that be?" "It doesn't appear to be valid," she said, placing it back on the counter with a soft, final tap. A man in a rumpled business suit behind Marcus groaned audibly. Marcus ignored him. He knew this was a performance, and he was the intended audience. "I can assure you, it's valid," Marcus said calmly. "Perhaps you could try scanning it." Sarah offered a tight, condescending smile. "Sir, I've been doing this for 10 years. I can spot a counterfeit printout a mile away. People like you try this all the time, thinking you can talk your way into a seat you haven't paid for." People like you. The phrase, so casually delivered, was a perfectly crafted microaggression, designed to provoke, to anger, to make him lose his composure. He felt the familiar, hot surge of indignation, the ghost of the 20-year-old boy in a frayed shirt being told he didn't belong. He suppressed it instantly, channeling it into a cold, diamond-hard focus. "I'm not trying to talk my way anywhere," he said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its warmth. "I'm asking you to do your job and verify the ticket in your system." His precision seemed to unnerve her. Her composure flickered. A second agent, a young man named Ethan with a smug face and a sloppily knotted tie, sauntered over. Problem, Sarah, he asked, pointedly ignoring Marcus. This gentleman is insisting his fake ticket is real, she said, a note of theatrical weariness in her voice. Ethan leaned over the counter, giving Marcus a dismissive once-over. Look, buddy, why don't you just step aside? You're holding up the line. The economy check-in is over there. He gestured vaguely with his thumb. This was the escalation, the public humiliation. Marcus felt the gazes of the other passengers on him, a mixture of annoyance, pity, and suspicion. He saw a teenager a few feet away raise his phone, the small red light of its camera winking on. Good. Witnesses. My seat is 2A, Marcus stated, his voice flat and unyielding. I will not be stepping aside until I have my boarding pass. His refusal to be dismissed, to be cowed, shifted the dynamic. The scene was no longer a simple transactional dispute. It was a confrontation. Sarah, sensing she was losing control, reached for the phone. I'm calling security, she announced, her voice sharp with manufactured authority. From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw a third figure approaching a man in his late 40s, gray at the temples, his manager's tie cinched like a noose. His name tag read Martin Hale. He strode toward them with an air of grim importance, his eyes already narrowed on Marcus. This was the final piece. The enforcer. What's the holdup here? Martin barked, arriving at the counter. This man presented a fraudulent ticket for first class and is refusing to cooperate, Sarah reported, her voice laced with the vindication of a subordinate whose judgment has been confirmed by a superior. Martin Hale looked Marcus up and down, his lip curling in a faint sneer. He didn't ask for Marcus's side. He didn't glance at the ticket. He simply rendered his verdict. Figures, he muttered, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He then fixed his gaze on Marcus, his eyes cold and hard. Sir, you are creating a disturbance. You will leave this counter immediately, or I will have you removed from the airport. The threat was naked, the prejudice undisguised. It was exactly what Alistair had wanted. A public scene, a destabilizing conflict, a moment designed to strip away Marcus's dignity and reduce him to just another statistic of casual bigotry. But Marcus Grant did not rattle. He did not break. He had been forged in fires hotter than this. He met the manager's hostile gaze and held it, his silence becoming a vast, unbreachable wall. He let the weight of their accusations, their contempt, their orchestrated theater, settle in the air. He let the phone cameras record. He let their injustice hang itself with its own rope. Then, with a small, deliberate motion, he adjusted the cufflink on his left sleeve. It was a simple gesture, but in the charged atmosphere, it felt like a king calmly surveying a battlefield before ordering the final, devastating charge. He knew who had arranged this, and he knew that their mistake wasn't in underestimating his wealth or his power. Their mistake was in underestimating his patience. The arrival of two uniformed security officers sent a ripple of finality through the assembled crowd. They moved with the heavy, deliberate tread of men accustomed to ending arguments, their radios crackling with static that sounded like distant, angry whispers. Sarah's shoulders relaxed in relief. Ethan's smirk returned, wider and more confident than before. For them, the drama was over. Authority had arrived to sweep the problem away. Martin Hale puffed out his chest, stepping forward to direct the officers. This man, here, he needs to be escorted out. He's causing a disturbance. One of the officers, a broad man with a weary expression, rested a hand on his belt. Sir, he said, addressing Marcus with a tone that was tiredly procedural. Please come with us. The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath. The teenager's phone was still recording, its lens a small, unblinking eye capturing every nuance of the impending capitulation. But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he slowly raised his head, his gaze sweeping past the officers, past the smug triumvirate behind the counter, and settling on the crowd of onlookers. And then, for the first time since the confrontation began, he spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying a resonant, profound weight that cut through the ambient noise of the airport. There are only 12 of these tickets in existence. The statement landed with the force of a thunderclap in the quiet that followed. It was so specific, so strange, that it short-circuited the narrative of the scene. The officers paused. Martin frowned. Sarah's face, which had been set in a mask of triumph, now registered confusion. "What is he talking about?" someone whispered from the line. The teenager, Keith, zoomed in on Marcus's face, his own voice a hushed, excited murmur for his unseen audience. "Wait, did you guys hear that? 12 tickets." Marcus's eyes found Sarah's. "You're holding one of them." He then reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a slim, black phone, with practiced ease. He tapped the screen and put it on speaker, holding it up. A clear, female voice filled the space. "Elena Vostok." "Elena," Marcus said calmly, "please inform Mr. Hale, the duty manager for Horizon Airlines, who he is speaking to." A beat of silence. Martin Hale's eyes widened slightly. The name Vostok was not unknown in corporate legal circles. She was Marcus Grant's legendary bulldog. Elena's voice came back, sharp and cold as ice water. "Mr. Hale, my name is Elena Vostok, General Counsel for Apex Innovations. The man you are currently attempting to have removed from the premises is Marcus Grant. He is not just a first-class passenger. He is the majority shareholder of Horizon Airlines, a subsidiary acquired by Apex 6 months ago." A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Sarah's face drained of all color, her jaw slackening. Ethan stumbled back a half-step, his smirk dissolving into a mask of horror. Martin Hale froze, his body rigid, his face a canvas of dawning, sickening realization. The two security officers exchanged a wide-eyed look and simultaneously took a step backward, their hands falling away from their belts as if they had touched a hot stove. "Furthermore," Elena's voice continued, each word a perfectly enunciated hammer blow, "the ticket Ms. Mitchell is holding is an elite founder's pass, issued to the original 12 investors. It grants lifetime, unlimited first-class travel on any Horizon flight. It is, for all intents and purposes, the single most valuable piece of paper bearing the Horizon logo, and your staff has just publicly declared it a fake." Keith the teenager let out a low whistle. "Oh, this is gold," he muttered, his camera panning to capture the stunned, ashen faces behind the counter. Marcus lowered the phone, his expression unreadable. "You wanted verification. Mr. Hale," he said, his voice a quiet storm. "There it is." Martin's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The authority had drained from him, leaving behind a hollow, trembling shell. He looked at the ticket on the counter, then at Marcus, and for the first time, he truly saw him not as a problem to be dismissed, but as the architect of his own ruin. I didn't know," Sarah stammered, her voice a pathetic whisper. "That is precisely the problem," Marcus said, his gaze pinning her in place. "You judged me without knowing. You sentenced me without a trial. You assumed my worth based on your own narrow, pathetic prejudices. You weren't protecting your company. You were indulging your bigotry." The crowd, which had been a passive audience, now became a jury. A murmur of agreement swelled into a wave of outrage directed at the counter. "That's disgraceful," a woman shouted. "He tried to tell you," another added. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. Marcus stood in the same spot, but the ground beneath everyone's feet had been torn away. He was no longer the accused. He was the judge. He disconnected the call with Elena and looked at the 3 employees who had tried to humiliate him. They were broken, stripped of their power, exposed in the harsh fluorescent light for the entire world to see. "Alistair Finch sends his regards." "I assume," Marcus said, his voice low and directed only at Martin. Martin's flinch was all the confirmation he needed. This wasn't random. It was a failed assassination attempt on his reputation, orchestrated by his rival. Alistair had wanted to rattle him, to throw him off his game before the Chicago meeting. Instead, he had handed Marcus a weapon. The video of this encounter would be a viral sensation, painting Marcus as the victim of corporate arrogance and systemic prejudice, the very things Finch Industries represented. "You have 24 hours to tender your resignations," Marcus said, his voice devoid of heat. "A simple statement of fact. All 3 of you. If you do not, the legal and public fallout for you personally will be considerable." He then picked up his ticket from the counter, the paper that had been the catalyst for it all. He didn't look at them again. He turned and walked toward the security gate, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. He had not won by shouting. He had won by forcing the truth into the light and letting it burn. The video from the airport went viral before Marcus's flight even touched down in Chicago. Edited and uploaded by Keith the Witness. It was a masterclass in digital age justice. The shaky footage, the sharp, clear audio of Elena's voice, the slow-motion replays of the employees' collapsing faces. It was a perfectly packaged narrative of hubris and comeuppance. By morning, "I am Marcus Grant" was trending globally. He was no longer just a billionaire. He was a folk hero, a symbol for every person who had ever been judged, dismissed, or underestimated. Alistair Finch's plan had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. Finch Industries' stock took an immediate hit, while Apex's saw a modest bump. The media narrative had been set. This was a battle between the fossilized, prejudiced old guard and the enlightened, meritocratic new world. The board meeting in Chicago was a formality. Marcus walked in not as a hostile aggressor, but as a rescuer. He was calm, articulate, and magnanimous, never once mentioning the airport incident. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room had seen the video. His victory was assured. 2 days later, back in New York, a request came through for a private meeting. From Alistair. No lawyers, no assistants, just the 2 of them. Marcus agreed immediately. He knew this was the real confrontation, the one that had been simmering for decades. He chose the venue, a private room at a neutral, Old World Club in Midtown, a place with dark wood paneling and the hushed reverence of a library. It was a nod to Alistair's world, a subtle indication that Marcus was not afraid to meet him on his own turf. Alistair was already there when Marcus arrived, standing by a window overlooking a rain-slicked street. He held a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light. He looked haggard, the polished veneer of the gala stripped away to reveal something raw and frayed beneath. "You must be enjoying this," Alistair said without turning around, his voice rough. "The public adulation, the media crowning you a saint, my board practically rolling out the red carpet for you." "I'm enjoying the result," Marcus replied, taking a seat at the heavy oak table. "Your methods left something to be desired." Alistair finally turned. And the look in his eyes was not of a defeated corporate rival. It was a haunted, feral glare, burning with a hatred so profound it seemed to consume all the air in the room. He slammed his glass down on the table, whiskey sloshing over the rim. "Methods," he snarled, his voice a low, vicious rasp. "You think this is about stock prices and board seats. You think this is about business." He stalked toward the table, leaning forward on his knuckles, his face just inches from Marcus's. The smell of whiskey and grief radiated from him. "This was never about the company," he hissed. "This is about Lily." The name, spoken with such raw agony, hung between them. The polite fiction of their corporate rivalry dissolved, leaving only the jagged, ugly truth of their shared past. "She was 16. Marcus. She was my sister. And she burned to death in that house while you saved yourself." Marcus felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He had expected accusations, threats, another round of corporate warfare. He had not expected this, the unearthing of a grave he thought long sealed. "That's not what happened," Marcus said, his voice strained. "Isn't it?" Alistair's laugh was a broken, ugly sound. "I was there. I saw it. I saw the fire. I saw the smoke. And I saw you. You were closer to her room than anyone. You could have gotten to her. But you ran. You ran out of the back, and you left her behind to die." The accusation was a physical force, pressing down on Marcus, stealing his breath. Alistair's memory of the event was a poisoned dagger, twisted and sharp. Marcus's own memories were a blur of trauma heat, fear, pain, a desperate, futile scrabbling at a locked window. But he remembered running. He remembered the overwhelming, primal instinct to escape the flames. Could Alistair be right in the panic and terror? Had he failed? Had he abandoned her? "You got out," Alistair continued, his voice cracking with a pain that was 30 years old, but felt as fresh as an open wound. "You got out with a few little burns on your back. And you disappeared. My father paid to clean it all up, to seal the records, to make the whole ugly story go away so our family wouldn't be associated with the trash from that neighborhood. But I never forgot. I never forgot your face. The face of the coward who left my sister to choke on smoke." This was the source of it all. The deep, festering wound that had poisoned Alistair's entire life. His hatred of Marcus wasn't about class or business. It was a deeply personal vendetta, rooted in grief, and a narrative of betrayal that he had clung to for 3 decades. "So, yes," Alistair spat, his eyes gleaming with unshed tears. "I tried to humiliate you at the airport. I will try to ruin you in the press. I will burn your entire empire to the ground if I have to. Because you owe her. You owe her a life. And I am going to collect." Marcus sat in stunned silence. The fight for Finch Industries was a smokescreen. The real battle was for the truth of a single, horrific night 30 years ago, and for the first time in his adult life, faced with the raw certainty of Alistair's grief, Marcus felt a sliver of doubt enter his own heart. The fortress of his composure had been breached, not by a corporate attack, but by the ghost of a dead girl and the devastating question, what if he's right? The war shifted from the boardroom to the court of public opinion. Alistair, fueled by his righteous, grief-stricken fury, launched a scorched earth campaign against Marcus. Anonymous sources began leaking documents to sympathetic journalists, financial records from Marcus's early, struggling years, twisted to look like shady dealings, old-school reports painting him as a troubled, reckless youth. The stories were all carefully crafted to build a singular narrative. Marcus Grant was a man from the wrong side of the tracks, who had been hiding a dark secret his entire life. Then came the centerpiece of Alistair's attack. A prominent conservative news outlet, published an explosive exposé titled The Ashes of Apex, hinting at Marcus's involvement in a tragic house fire decades ago that had resulted in the death of a teenage girl, Lily Finch. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, quoting unnamed childhood acquaintances who remembered Marcus as a dangerous influence. It didn't explicitly accuse him of a crime, but it painted a damning picture of negligence and moral cowardice. The public narrative, once so firmly in Marcus's favor, began to fracture. The hero of the airport was now a man with a questionable past. The takeover of Finch Industries was reframed as a predator's final, ghoulish victory over the family he had already grievously wounded. Marcus felt the pressure mounting from all sides. His board was nervous. His investors were calling. But the external pressures were nothing compared to the war raging within him. Alistair's accusation had burrowed into his mind like a parasite, feeding on the gaps in his own traumatized memory. The nightmares intensified. He would wake up in the cold sweat of his minimalist fortress, the smell of smoke in his nostrils, Lily's name a silent scream on his lips. He remembered the fire, the heat on his back, the splintering wood under his hands as he clawed at something, a wall, a window, and he remembered running. Why had he run? He sat with Elena in his sterile office. The city, a silent, glittering panorama behind him. A stack of news clippings and printouts of the libelous articles sat on the glass desk between them. "This is a character assassination. Pure and simple," Elena said, her voice tight with anger. "Alistair is trying to poison the jury pool of shareholders before the final vote. We can sue for defamation, but it will take months, years. By then, the damage will be done." Marcus stared out the window, his reflection a faint, troubled ghost. "He believes it. Elena. He believes I left his sister to die." Elena studied him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "And what do you believe?" He finally met her gaze. "I don't know," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "My memory of that night? It's broken. Fragments. Sensations. I remember fear like I've never felt before. Or since. I remember pain. But the sequence, the choices I made, it's all smoke." The admission of vulnerability was a rare, shocking thing. Elena's expression softened from warrior to protector. "Then we find the truth," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "The real truth. Not Alistair's version, or your fractured one. We go back to the source." "The records are sealed," Marcus said. "Alistair told me his father paid to have it all buried." "No record is ever truly buried," Elena countered, a determined fire in her eyes. "It just requires a bigger shovel. I want you to authorize me to hire a team of private investigators, the best. Ex-FBI, ex-journalists, people who know how to dig. We need everything from that night. The original police report, the fire marshal's investigation, witness statements, hospital records. Anything that was filed before the Finch family money washed it all away." "Do it," Marcus said without hesitation. "Whatever it costs." "There's one more thing," Elena said, leaning forward. "Alistair is pushing for an emergency shareholder meeting to vote on the acquisition. He's citing the instability caused by these revelations about you. He's forcing a final confrontation. He thinks he can win it by destroying your character in a public forum." "When is it?" "1 week." A week. A week to excavate a 30-year-old truth. A week to fight a ghost that haunted both him and his enemy. The days that followed were a blur of tension and frantic activity, while Marcus navigated the treacherous waters of corporate damage control, holding tense calls with his board and major investors. Elena and her team worked around the clock. They were digital archaeologists, digging through archived city records, tracking down retired civil servants, chasing whispers and rumors. They hit wall after wall. The official police report was a single, heavily redacted page. The fire department's file was mysteriously missing. The neighbors who had lived on that street 30 years ago had either died or moved away. Their memories faded. It was as if a hand had meticulously erased the event from history. With 2 days to go before the shareholder meeting, Elena walked into Marcus's office, looking exhausted but triumphant. She placed a single, thin file on his desk. "We found him," she said. "The first responder, a retired firefighter named Jack Riley. He was the first one on the scene that night. He was a rookie. It was his first fatal fire. He never forgot it. The Finch family lawyers paid him a visit a week after, made him sign an NDA, and encouraged him to amend his report to be more vague. But he kept his original notes." Marcus stared at the file, his heart pounding. The truth was in there. His vindication or his damnation. He was reluctant to talk. Elena continued. "He's an old man now, scared of the Finch family's reach, even after all these years. But the investigator was persuasive. He gave us a sworn affidavit detailing everything he remembered, everything he wrote in his original report." Marcus reached for the file, his hand trembling slightly. "Don't read it yet," Elena said, placing her hand over his. "Alistair will have his own version of the truth at that meeting. He'll have his theater, his doctored evidence, his emotional appeal. Let him play his hand. And when he is at his most confident, when he thinks he has you cornered and destroyed, that's when you show them the truth." Marcus looked from the file to Elena's determined face. He nodded, a sense of cold, terrifying clarity settling over him. The final battle was at hand. It would not be fought with stock prices or legal motions, but with the simple, brutal weight of memory. The conference room was a sterile, soulless chamber of beige carpets and acoustic ceiling tiles, designed to facilitate the bloodless transactions of modern capitalism. Yet, on this day, it felt like a Roman Colosseum. The long, polished mahogany table was surrounded by the grim-faced board members of Finch Industries and Apex Innovations. The gallery was packed with major shareholders, financial analysts, and a swarm of journalists, their cameras and microphones poised like vultures awaiting a feast. On screens mounted around the room, stock tickers for both companies blinked in a nervous, staccato rhythm of green and red. The air was thick with a tension so palpable it was almost suffocating. This was the emergency shareholder meeting, the final, public showdown for the soul of Finch Industries. Marcus sat at one end of the table, flanked by Elena. He was a portrait of stillness, his hands resting calmly on the table before him. He had not read the contents of the file Elena had given him. He had placed his trust in her, and in the belief that the truth, whatever it was better than the crippling doubt that had plagued him. At the other end of the table, Alistair Finch radiated a manic, triumphant energy. He believed this was his moment of vindication, the culmination of a 30-year quest for justice. He looked at Marcus with the fiery eyes of an inquisitor about to burn a heretic at the stake. After a few tense procedural formalities, the floor was given to Alistair. He rose to his feet, his movements theatrical and deliberate. He walked to the podium, not as a CEO defending his company, but as a grieving brother demanding a reckoning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice trembling with well-rehearsed emotion, "we are not here today to discuss quarterly earnings or market synergy. We are here to discuss character. We are here to discuss the moral fabric of the man who seeks to seize control of this great company, a company my great-grandfather built on the bedrock of integrity." He paused, letting his words hang in the silent room. He then projected a black and white photograph onto the large screen behind him. It was a picture of a smiling, dark-haired teenage girl, Lily. "This was my sister, Lily Finch," Alistair said, his voice cracking. "She was 16 years old when she died in a fire that one other person escaped, a fire that Marcus Grant walked away from." A shocked murmur rippled through the gallery. Alistair pressed his advantage, his voice rising in righteous anger. "For 30 years, my family has borne this grief in private. We did not seek retribution. But now, the man who was there that night, the man who failed to act, who chose self-preservation over the life of a child, stands before you and asks you to give him our legacy. Can we, in good conscience, hand the future of Finch Industries to a man whose past is built on a foundation of such profound cowardice?" He then presented his proof, a digitally aged and manipulated photograph that seemed to show Marcus standing at a distance from the burning house, watching. A sworn statement from a witness, a known associate of Alistair's. Marcus recognized, claiming he heard Lily screaming for help, while Marcus did nothing. It was a compelling, emotionally devastating performance. The room was swaying. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. The stock ticker for Apex blinked red. Then, red again. Alistair delivered his closing argument, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "I ask you to look at him. Look at the man who wants to own our future, and ask yourselves, is this a man you can trust? Or is he a ghost? Haunted by the ashes of a past he has desperately tried to outrun." He returned to his seat to a stunned, heavy silence. He had landed what he believed was the killing blow. He looked at Marcus, his face a mask of triumphant, sorrowful certainty. It was at that moment that Elena leaned over and slid the thin file across the table to Marcus. "Now," she whispered, with the eyes of the entire room on him. Marcus opened the file. His gaze fell upon the first page, a scanned copy of Jack Riley's handwritten notes from the night of the fire. He read quickly, his mind absorbing the neat, block-lettered prose. Then, he moved to the typed, sworn affidavit. The world around him seemed to slow down. The sterile conference room, the tense faces, Alistair's smug glare, it all faded into a dull background roar. The truth, clear and undeniable, rose from the pages. The report detailed how a rookie firefighter named Riley was the first to arrive at a fully engulfed residential fire. He found one boy, Alistair Finch, hysterical by the front gate, having fled at the first smell of smoke, screaming that his sister was still inside, as Riley and his partner prepared their hoses. They heard a noise from the side of the house. There, they found another boy, Marcus Grant, coughing up black smoke, his t-shirt singed, his back covered in fresh, angry burns. He had been using a heavy rock to try and smash through the thick glass of a ground-floor bedroom window. Lily's window. Debris from the collapsing roof had fallen onto his back, knocking him down, but not stopping him. He had stayed. He had tried to save her. The secondary twist landed on Marcus with the force of a physical impact, knocking the wind out of him. Alistair's entire life, his 30 years of burning hatred, was a lie, a story he had constructed to shield himself from his own crippling guilt and cowardice. It wasn't Marcus who had run. It was Alistair. Marcus looked up from the file, his gaze locking with Alistair's. He held in his hands the power to utterly annihilate him. He could stand up, read the firefighter's affidavit aloud, and expose Alistair not as a grieving brother, but as a pathetic, terrified child who had abandoned his own sister and spent a lifetime projecting his shame onto another. He could destroy him completely, in front of his board, the press, the world. This was the moment of his true empowerment, not in acquiring a company, but in holding the soul of his enemy in his hands. The room waited, silent and expectant. What would he do? Would he choose revenge? Or was there another path? A profound stillness settled over Marcus. He looked at Alistair, and, for the first time, he did not see a rival or a monster. He saw a man trapped in a prison of his own making, a man so consumed by a 30-year-old lie that he had become its most fervent believer. He saw the terrified child still lurking behind the man's eyes, a child who had run from a fire and had been running ever since. In that moment, Marcus understood that the ultimate revenge was not destruction, but mercy. To obliterate Alistair with the truth would only perpetuate the cycle of pain that began in the ashes of that house. He closed the file. Slowly, deliberately. He rose to his feet. He did not go to the podium. He stood in his place at the table, a quiet, commanding presence that drew every eye in the room. He did not look at Alistair. He addressed the board, the shareholders, the silent, watching room. "There has been a great deal of speculation about a tragedy from my past," he began, his voice calm and steady, devoid of the emotional theatrics Alistair had employed. "Mr. Finch is correct about one thing. It is a past I have never spoken of. Not out of shame, but out of a grief I chose to carry in private." He paused, letting the weight of his composure contrast with Alistair's histrionics. The official record of that night has, for many years, been incomplete, sealed by a family's desire for privacy in a time of unimaginable loss, a desire I have always respected. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in Alistair's direction, a gesture of grace that was utterly disarming. "However, given the circumstances, I am now compelled to present the full, unredacted truth." He held up a single sheet of paper from the file. It was a certified copy of the original, unamended fire marshal's report, which Elena had managed to get unsealed by a judge just that morning. "This is the initial report from the fire marshal on the scene," Marcus said. He did not read the entire document. He did not mention Alistair's presence at the front gate. He did not reveal the details of Alistair's cowardice. He simply read one carefully chosen paragraph. A second youth, identified as Marcus Grant, was discovered at the site of the residence, having sustained second-degree burns to his back and suffering from smoke inhalation. Evidence at the scene, including a broken rock and impact marks on the bedroom window, indicates a sustained attempt to breach the residence to effect a rescue of the victim trapped inside. He stopped reading and placed the paper gently on the table. "The report concludes," Marcus stated, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "that my efforts were ultimately unsuccessful due to the rapid spread of the fire and the structural collapse of the roof. Here is the truth." He made eye contact with each board member, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I did not run from that fire. I ran toward it. I carry the scars from that night on my back to this day. They are not a mark of shame. They are a reminder that sometimes, even when you give everything you have, it is not enough." The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and profound. The truth, delivered without malice or vengeance, was 1,000 times more powerful than Alistair's rage. It was clean, factual, and irrefutable. The shareholders and board members looked from Marcus's dignified, scarred integrity to Alistair's carefully constructed narrative, and they saw it for the poisonous fiction it was. The chairman of the board cleared his throat. "In light of this clarifying information," he said, his voice heavy with understatement, "I believe it is time to proceed with the vote on the acquisition." The result was a foregone conclusion. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor of the acquisition by Apex Innovations. It was a landslide, a quiet, decisive execution. Through it all, Alistair Finch sat frozen in his chair. As the votes were tallied, the color drained from his face. The lie that had been the central pillar of his identity, the engine of his hatred, had been surgically removed, and his entire world had collapsed inward. Marcus's unexpected mercy was a crueler blow than any accusation could have been. By refusing to expose Alistair's shame, Marcus had forced Alistair to confront it himself, alone, in the wreckage of his public and private defeat. He didn't rage. He didn't protest. He made a small, choked sound, a gasp of a man drowning in an ocean of his own guilt. He slumped in his chair, utterly broken, his face buried in his hands. He was defeated not by Marcus's revenge, but by the quiet, unyielding weight of the truth. 6 months later, the name Finch Industries was gone, absorbed and rebranded under the Apex umbrella. The corporate world had moved on, its memory as short and fickle as a flickering stock price. But Marcus Grant had not. He stood not in a boardroom, but on a freshly paved basketball court in the heart of the old neighborhood where he and Alistair had grown up. The dilapidated, forgotten corner of the city was showing signs of new life. Murals bloomed on once graffitied walls, and the skeleton of a new building rose against the autumn sky. He was dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a dark gray Henley that subtly traced the scarred terrain of his back. He was here for a dedication ceremony. Behind him stood the gleaming, newly constructed Lily Finch Community Center. It was his project, funded entirely by a new foundation he had established. The center offered after-school programs, job training, and a state-of-the-art wing dedicated to a youth burn survivor program, providing physical and psychological support for children who had endured the trauma of fire. He had used his victory not to gloat, but to heal, to build something positive and lasting from the ashes of a shared tragedy. It was a tribute to the girl who had died, an act of closure for the boy who had survived, and perhaps a quiet offering of grace to the man who had been lost. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped up to a small podium, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd of community members, local kids, and city officials. He didn't talk about business or acquisitions. He spoke about second chances. "This place," he said, gesturing to the building behind him, "is built on the idea that our past does not have to be our prison. The wounds we carry, seen and unseen, do not have to define us. They can be a source of strength. They can teach us empathy. They can be the foundation upon which we build a better future, for ourselves and for our community." He looked at the faces of the children in the front row, his gaze soft. "This center is dedicated to the memory of Lily Finch. May her spirit live on in the laughter and learning that will fill these halls. And may it be a reminder to us all that the most powerful thing we can build is hope." After the applause faded and the ceremony wound down, Elena found him standing alone by the entrance, watching a group of kids already shooting hoops on the new court. She handed him a tablet. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said. On the screen was a financial statement for the foundation. Near the bottom was a single, massive line item, an anonymous donation of $10 million. "It came in this morning," Elena explained, "wired from a blind trust in Switzerland. It took some digging, but I traced its origin." She looked at him, her eyes telling him the answer before she spoke the words. "It was established last month by Alistair Finch. He liquidated a significant portion of his personal assets to fund it." Marcus stared at the number on the screen. Alistair had resigned from public life immediately after the shareholder meeting, disappearing from the society pages and boardrooms he had once dominated. No one had heard from him since. This donation was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. There were no words attached, no explanations. It was a quiet, anonymous act of penance, a small, solitary step out of the prison of his past, a glimmer of redemption from a man who had lost everything but had, perhaps, found a small piece of his own soul in the wreckage. Marcus looked from the tablet to the plaque by the door, its bronze letters gleaming in the afternoon sun, in loving memory of Lily Finch. The nightmares of smoke and fire had stopped. The phantom ache in his back had faded. In conquering his rival, he had been forced to conquer his own past, and in choosing mercy over revenge, he had found something far more valuable than any company, a measure of peace. He had used his power not to destroy, but to rebuild. And in the process, he had rebuilt himself.